As most Americans know, our nation was rocked by major street protests and riots in the aftermath of George Floyd's death on May 25, 2020. The threats of harassment, arson, looting, intimidation, assaults, and murder have become the trademarks of the Black Lives Matter movement that continue to be deployed today, nearly 1 year after Mr. Floyd's death, as we witnessed during the Derek Chauvin trial in April of 2021. The Democrat Party owns this societal problem. The party is complicit in allowing an organization founded on Marxist ideology and violent overthrow of government to run rampant through our streets, while it co-conspires to demonize law enforcement and attack those who speak out against its weaponized proxy. The BLM emblem on our streets, painted in the boilerplate yellow lettering, is a reminder to citizens that BLM rules their neighborhoods, and that city leaders, in approving these new monuments while tearing down the monuments of our past, will do whatever it takes to promote, protect, and preserve an organization whose foundations lie on false and manufactured narratives of institutionalized racism in our law enforcement bodies. This virulent movement, dictated at the top by Black Lives Matter Incorporated, has many in the mainstream public on edge, and few are willing to risk the repercussions of calling out the emperor for having no clothes. The city of Santa Cruz, California is no different. In a county where 80% of the votes were cast for Joe Biden in the 2020 election, and in a city that hosts the University of California, Santa Cruz, Santa Cruz is as woke and progressive as they come. It is the midnight blue of all blues. Santa Cruz, too, shared in hosting its own George Floyd demonstrations, and equivalently, there was damage done to the city, though not as extensively as in other cities around the nation. Within weeks of the protests, like many other cities, the Santa Cruz City Council granted an encroachment permit in late June for a permanent Black Lives Matter street mural monument to be erected. A Black Lives Matter month was established for July 2020. On September 12, 2020, the mural was completed, to much fanfare from city officials and the media. The city of Santa Cruz was now officially a Black Lives Matter city, and is so self-aligned to the Black Lives Matter movement and, by association, Black Lives Matter Incorporated, that it remains intent on cultivating and retaining the Black Lives Matter brand in the eyes of its residents, while maligning those courageous enough or stupid enough to stand up to challenge the movement. It was under these less than optimal conditions that our small nonprofit organization, First Amendment Rights Preservation Society, or FARPS, decided to take some significant personal risks and do exactly that, to stand up against what we believed was the antithesis of the teachings of the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., character over color, peace over violence, and the impressive advances in racial equality spurred by the civil rights movement over half a century ago. We disagree with most of the narratives and the proposed solutions demanded by Black Lives Matter, which we feel would dramatically increase the level of suffering of the Black community in the long run, not alleviate it. Yet regardless of our opinion or theirs, the principle of public debate remains a critical component of a free society, where only the best ideas have the resilience and kineticism to rise up to the surface, to be scrutinized, and ultimately chosen freely as the best path ahead. Yet as Black Lives Matter and its supporters continue to demonstrate, dissenters carrying alternative, more fact-based opinions and ideas are unwelcome in the court of public opinion, which is now managed at the highest levels by a power-hungry federal government and dictated by the sheer greed of corporate America, where the repercussions to its challengers range anywhere from social ostracism to death. It is for these reasons that FARPS threw caution to the wind and approached the city of Santa Cruz with our vision of communion in a divided country. We were not interested in attacking the Black Lives Matter mural that the mayor and the city council chose to erect through a third-party organization, but in reaffirming the idea that the city of Santa Cruz still supported and respected First Amendment rights of its residents and the spirit of public discourse, and that even its strong political biases would be no match against the innate right of all beings to speak freely and frankly, a fragile right that most Americans still take for granted, but is now fading through the political manipulation of fear-mongering and identity politics. Our vision was to make a strong counterstatement to both local leaders and to the community at large, and to allow the public to decide between the alternatives. We did this by proposing to the city our own street mural monument that we dubbed God Bless America, a street mural with a patriotic message protected by the free speech clause of the First Amendment, and that fails the religious criteria test for the Establishment Clause to reject it. This proposed mural was to sit at a cross street adjacent to the Black Lives Matter mural, meeting at an intersection which we called the Free Speech Zone. Sadly, the city quickly and quietly buried our proposal 6 feet under at the local cemetery. Indeed, this was their right to choose among government monuments based on the landmark Supreme Court decisions Rosenberger versus Rector and Rust versus Sullivan. Government speech legally permitted the city to squelch our mural. In the midst of our engagements with the city, a new question dawned on us. Were there others in the community who shared similar beliefs about Black Lives Matter and who rejected the concept and deployment of the Black Lives Matter mural on the streets of Santa Cruz? Or were we basically challenging this alone in a dark blue city? We knew that protest crowd sizes were not a good barometer of Santa Cruz resident support for either the movement or the mural, as crowd compositions were made up of not only Santa Cruz residents, but residents of adjacent cities in Santa Cruz County and of neighboring Silicon Valley counties. By this time, we also knew that crowd sizes were further enhanced by the phony narrative of a racist cop killing a defenseless black man, which was embedded in the public psyche in the immediate aftermath of George Floyd's death. Yet the optics of crowd sizes were leveraged by the City Council as proof that Santa Cruz residents overwhelmingly supported the movement, and by inference, the street mural. But this imperfect yardstick lacked any statistical substance. So FARPS decided to create and deploy an anonymous community survey that posed these and other questions to Santa Cruz and Santa Cruz County residents. The anonymity feature, linked only to email addresses that we secured, was crucial, as we hypothesized before developing the survey that many residents could fear possible retaliations by publicly denouncing the mural. The survey results were riveting. Of the 40 residents of Santa Cruz County taking the survey, those who disagreed with the mural broke down as follows: 0% Democrat, 100% Republican, 66% Libertarian, and 40% Independent. Given that Santa Cruz County was a Democrat stronghold, these numbers still suggested broad support for the mural. Yet we looked more closely at those Democrats and found that their intensity of support for the mural scored only 2.5, halfway between neutral and agree, with 4 being strongly agree on our scale. Meanwhile, of those who disagreed or strongly disagreed with the mural, most expressed fears of the social repercussions of speaking out. With the God Bless America mural now only a distant memory, but armed with the data from our survey, we became convinced that, in the same way that Black Lives Matter became effective in delivering its message to the public through street protests, that perhaps our own message could be effectively delivered there too. We wanted to demonstrate to a fearful and unheard segment of our community that we understood their silence and that they did not stand alone. We wanted to act as the conduit for the voices of these residents who held diametrically opposing beliefs than those of Black Lives Matter, and who sought a different set of solutions to aid the Black community. We decided upon something both symbolic and peaceful: the free speech mural, a temporary street mural made of washable liquid chalk, created in the precise location as the proposed God Bless America permanent street mural. As the city had entirely shut down its communication channels with our organization and openly denigrated it in its rejection of the God Bless America mural, we notified the chief of police 1 week ahead of the free speech mural protest as to the date, time, purpose, duration, and nature of the paint we intended to use. Additionally, we also requested Santa Cruz Police Department support to reroute traffic away from the venue during the 1-hour event. The protest and the physical creation of the mural took place on December 11th, 2020. When the event began at 4 p.m., there were no Santa Cruz police officers on the scene. And more significantly, the mural was never completed that day. As the mural was being painted, multiple police cruisers arrived on the scene, promptly arrested the organizer for vandalism, and removed him from the venue, effectively terminating the small assembly of 8 to 12 protesters who gathered their belongings and went back to their homes. Our public message could not be delivered that day, nor on any day. So decreed the city of Santa Cruz. This was the true story of a small counter-movement attempting to germinate in a hostile political stronghold. There are likely other small movements in Black Lives Matter cities around the United States, facing similar hostility and attacks by their own city leaders. Yet the size of a movement is thankfully impertinent to the laws of the land. The Bill of Rights applies to the individual, not to any particular group or ideology. One individual's voice is no less valid and should be no less heard than the voices of many. We place the duties to protect these individual rights into the hands of our elected officials and our judiciary. These fragile rights easily and regularly come under assault by government leaders who choose their politics over the innate laws of humanity so thoughtfully dispensed by our founding fathers. The city of Santa Cruz should be no different. In its obsession to establish and preserve Santa Cruz as a Black Lives Matter city, the mayor, the city council, and the chief of police made one crucial miscalculation in their avaricious efforts to ward off detractors to the Black Lives Matter movement. They silenced a small voice that chose to fight back. In doing so, the city set off a chain reaction of a slew of constitutional violations that would make most legal scholars cringe. Infringing on First Amendment rights by disrupting the free speech mural protest and arresting its organizer. Advocating for one movement over another through disproportionate uses of city resources and disparate interpretations and enforcements of the law. And lastly, surpassing the restraints placed on government speech in its suppression of a constituent voice, thereby failing in its obligation to be, quote, accountable to the electorate, end quote, as expressed in the Supreme Court decision, Board of Regents of University of Wisconsin System versus Southworth. Government speech certainly permits a local government to leverage state powers in its advocacy of a particular movement, but it crosses an important line when, in doing so, it simultaneously uses those powers or denies those powers to delay, obstruct, misinform, discourage, denigrate, smear, restrain, and even terminate an opposing counter-movement, no matter what its size or composition. That line just crossed is called discrimination. We highlight these inequities dispensed by the city and the police as we compare and contrast the two different movements, Black Lives Matter and God Bless America, in a summary we call A Tale of Two Protests, an apples-to-apples case study on how the city of Santa Cruz deployed resources and enforced laws unequally depending on the content of the message. We oftentimes do not realize that the fight to protect and defend our constitutional rights begins locally. It is within each of our capacities and obligations to effect change in our own communities, to call out local tyrants and to punish them accordingly. We cannot rely on our local leaders to protect these critical rights, as they are often the abusers themselves. That responsibility falls upon each of us to be vigilant protectors of these rights, such as our right to speech. Until we overcome our fears and test our voices in a hostile world, the only sounds that we will ever hear are from the voices that have made us silent in the first place.